Guy, can you hear me? Yes, I don't care about that. Okay, great. I'm just gonna ask them to activate this because. Okay, great. I think they're activating it. If you can talk. Hello? Are you talking?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All
That's
right.
great. Okay, if you can talk a little bit more so that I can see how the audio quality is.
All right. Just like testing to see what would be the adequate tone and the transmission is okay.
Okay. Um, or yeah, I don't think that transcribers can actually hear you properly. If you can talk again, just
All right. So let me
yes,
keep
that's much
talking so
better.
that the transcribers could test and see if they can hear me and transcription would then therefore work. Otherwise, do we have a particular order for the speakers, or I remember we have like 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning for each one, and then at the end. And I really don't want to make things complicated, so will try not to interrupt remotely your debate going on, but I try to be uh, uh,
This is
active.
Avery. I'm the moderator. And what I was going to do after I've done a brief introduction is I was then going to, since I'm happened to have decided to go in alphabetical order, coincidentally, you would be first. So once I've finished my quick spiel, then I will go to you for your first statement as the first one.
All right. So I would be in the very beginning. When are we starting?
We're starting in a couple minutes, and then I'll speak a little bit, and then I'll go to you.
All right.
But that's not B. Holland.
All right. And do you think it's better for me to keep the camera and the sound on during the debate, or maybe just to block it and leave it mute?
Yes, you can activate your camera and we can have you on the screen.
Yeah, but during all time, I'm I'm not used to being an IGF star, so maybe.
So that depends totally on you. If you want to be projected on the screen all the time, we can do that. If you just want to be projected on the screen only when you speak, we can do that as well.
All right. I think I'll be only during my speech. Oh, I can just this way people will feel that I'm present, so that's okay for me. But,
Okay, so we just project you on the screen when you speak. Thank you very much.
all right, thank you.
You know that the W is silent. It's Bolo. The W is not pronounced for German name.
Yeah, no, I don't think I was going to pronounce the W, but thank you. There's Bobby Flame, there's Chris Wright, Iteka. I don't see Grace. Oh, okay.
I've seen her
Well,
yesterday.
she shows, she shows, she doesn't, she doesn't. Susie Hargreaves or Hargraves?
Hargreaves.
Hargreaves. Byron Holland. Izumi Okutani. It is 4:30, so I guess it's time to start. My name's Avri Dorian. I'll be moderating this session on best practices or current best practices in multi-stakeholder participation. We have a fairly full panel, and as such, I'm going to try and limit most of our talking to 2 minutes per turn, if at all possible, which means usually you sort of say what you have to say, but you have no need to repeat it in 3 different ways if you can. Now, this session basically represents a step in a new process that the IGF is going through on trying to collect the best practices in a number of areas. In our case, it's multi-stakeholder participation. And basically, a document has been collected of the first comments on this by John Laprise, and it's been available for discussion for a short time. And so we wanted to basically start out today with discussions on that. The way this is set up to run is I'm first going to ask the panelists to give a 2-minute discussion of what they think is the most important point. And it may be a definition, it may be an example, something implicit about best practice or something explicit about best practice. So basically, at this point, I want to introduce the first speaker, who's a remote participant, and it's Guilherme Almeida. And please, if I mispronounce anybody's name, forgive me, who's a specialist in public policies and government management at Brazilian Federal Ministry of Planning, Budget, and Management. So Guilherme, if you'd like to give us your introductory comments.
Thank you, Avery. I hope you're hearing me well. Is that okay with the transmission? All right. Well,
yes.
My name is Guilherme Almeida, and I work for the Brazilian government. We have been using online collaboration tools to enhance multi-stakeholder processes in the Brazilian Ministry of Justice since 2009. And the most successful experience so far is the collaborative drafting of the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights, the Marco Civil do Internet, which I had the opportunity and the honor to lead. So I'd like to use this as a source from which to bring some experiences and the lessons learned contribute to this process. First, a first lesson learned is that technology really contributes to a better balance in multi-stakeholder processes. So provided that you have minimum conditions such widely granted internet access, online platforms, they promote an equal footing in participatory processes. So it's easy and less expensive to access a platform, a website, than traveling to a meeting. And so reducing these barriers to access is an incentive for broader participation. Also, one methodological tool, which is quite relevant, is that it's fundamental to contextualize the debate and to organize them in an evolutive manner. So we really can use initial documents which define common ground and that clearly state the boundaries of the discussion. These are really good practices. Also, having the debate organized in an iterated manner so that people know which are the necessary steps and which are necessary turns. This allows to consolidate existing consensuses and to further advance on controversial issues. Also, it's really important to clearly communicate to all participants what are the expected outcomes and how decisions are made in the process. Another good strategy is to atomize debates. So fragmenting discussions into smaller and more specific topics, it allows stakeholders to provide more detailed analysis, and it also allows stakeholders to present their counter arguments to arguments which have already been presented. So this works as a magnifying lens to the debate. Indeed, evidences existing divergences and allows people to focus on them. And finally, transparency is crucial to any such a process, and not only to ensure trust, but also to ensure legitimacy. All contributions should be made publicly available, and they should be submitted to general analysis and criticism. So transparency, more than that, is necessary in the decision-making processes to ensure full accountability. These are experiences we bring from a national government policy-making process, but I believe that they could also inform multi-stakeholder processes which are not submitted to national boundaries. We saw something like this in Net Mundial, and I'm sure that we'll see these features in the processes to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I have Sebastian Belagamba. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I moved. I'm.
Okay.
I'm
Is Regional Bureau Director for Latin America and the Caribbean Internet Society. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. I think we have to put some context on this. Let's bring it forward. Thank you. I would like to say some few words about what we are doing in this respect in Latin America and continuing Net Mundial in particular, which was considered for us in the region as an extremely good exercise in this. Multi-stakeholder collaboration is something that the multi-stakeholder process is something that is spilling over the region right now, and it's something that we have to keep promoting for developing healthy communities, at least in our region in Latin America. So it's something that we are extremely engaged and extremely willing to collaborate and participate with the different stakeholders. In that sense, there's some good examples that we have in the region. For the sake of time, I'm not going through the examples right now, but that it's the one thing that I see is important to make the point today is that we have to find continuity in this effort. That's something that is extremely important. Sometimes we just try to produce advances just by bulk advances, and that's not the way, at least, that will work in our region. We have to have continuity. So we start something today here, which is very promising, which we very welcome. But I think we have to set the target of this continuing collaboration and look forward in a way that we don't wait until the next IGF for continuing the effort. We work here globally and even locally or regionally through the local national IGFs, through whatever mechanism we can think of, innovative way, whatever innovative way we can think of, but we have to commit to that, and that's something that I wanted to highlight. Thank you.
You made 2 points, one of which we'll follow up on at the end in terms of the where do we go from here, the what's the next steps, but also on the point of the specific examples you wanted to make. Those would be good things to contribute into the process as it moves on. The next speaker I've got, and I'm pretty much going in alphabetical order, is Guy Berger, UNESCO Director, Division of Freedom of Expression and Media Development. Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I was asked initially just to reflect on UNESCO's experience of multi-stakeholder mode of operation, and I'll spend a minute to tell you. You may know that UNESCO convened the first review event on the WSIS Plus 10, which was a conference in Paris last year. And it was multi-stakeholder in the sense that it involved quite a range of different groups. So there were 1,450 people. 32% of the people came from civil society. 22% were from government, private sector 11%, academia 13%, and then it goes a bit smaller after that. The UN intergovernmental constituency 9%. Anyway, there were a few others, technical community, and some who didn't identify themselves. I think the importance of this event, which represented 130 countries there, and also 800 remote participants, was that it came out with a final statement through a very participative, transparent, open process. And the final statement, it says quite important things. For example, it says in the final statement, multi-stakeholder processes have become an essential and unique approach to addressing issues affecting knowledge and information societies. It says it invites all stakeholders to acknowledge the importance of and renew their commitment to the Internet Governance Forum. So those are just two things in this final statement. So this was a multi-stakeholder statement. It was at UNESCO. It doesn't carry that much weight on its own. But here's the interesting thing. This was proposed by one of the UNESCO member states 8 months later at the General Conference of 195 member states, and they agreed, they endorsed it. So you have governments saying that they support multi-stakeholderism, they support the invitation to support the IGF. So this is quite a significant outcome of a multi-stakeholder process that then flowed into an intergovernmental process, and really I think gave so much weight to the fact that you had this multi-stakeholder conference was what gave weight and legitimacy finally, and why the member states, through their diplomats, felt that they actually could not adopt this. In fact, there was some debate. One government said, well, you know, this wasn't really all of us as governments. And a response by another government said, well, we were there at this multi-stakeholder conference, so we can't distance ourselves from it, so they voted for it. And just the last comment, we hope to do a similar kind of thing because this year and next year, because UNESCO now has to make an internet issues study looking at privacy, freedom of expression, access and ethics. This will be quite important in presenting options for member states as to what UNESCO and its member states should be doing on these issues going ahead. So next year, March 3rd, 4th in Paris, you have an excuse to come to Paris. We will have a multi-stakeholder conference to look at the draft of this study. I hope that the study will be enriched by that process, I'm sure it will, but it will also be legitimized in some ways and carry more weight when finally it gets presented to the 195 governments at the end of next year. So please come next March and make the multi-stakeholder model work.
Thank you. Yes, and having seen parts of read parts of that, and this is really quite encouraging to have multi-stakeholder endorsed in such a way. So the next speaker is Norbert Bolle, who's the co-convener of the JustNet Coalition.
Thank you. Talking about what is important about best practices, I would say it's important to bring the practice, first of all, to an acceptable level. To make it acceptable, a key point is it must be democratic. Democracy has several aspects. One aspect is the human right aspect. A state cannot be democratic if it does not respect human rights, and every person must have the right to actually enforce his human right against some process which might be majority-based. But to have a democratic state, every single person has a right to actually enforce his human rights. Also, there is this problem of some entities having too much power, and there must be a democratic process of limiting that power. For example, some states have institutions that like to do mass surveillance. There must be a democratic process to stop that from happening. And right now, the multi-stakeholder process does not really stop that from happening. So I would say to bring it up to an acceptable level, it must be brought to the point of actually stopping these human rights violations. It must be brought to a point of stopping abuses of power of any kind, commercial power, surveillance power, whatever power. Thank you.
The next I have Bobby Flame, Supervisory Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Government of the United States of America. Please.
Yes, Bobby Flame from the FBI, work in Washington, D.C. I guess I got started in the multi-stakeholder, model or participation with ICANN about 10 years ago. And I've also participated at ARIN and also the ITF. And I think from the law enforcement's perspective, it's very important to participate and be one of the, stakeholders within the multi-stakeholder process. Because if we're not here and we're not learning what industry is doing, what policies are going on, then I think we're shortchanging ourselves, meaning law enforcement. I think we watch a lot of Hollywood and we think that law enforcement has a big switch and we just turn it on and we have a lot of sexy screens, but it really doesn't work like that. So we need to be where the people are, where the decisions are being made, where the coordination, collaboration is being done, because it's very, very important for us. And my own personal experience in coming to ICANN and going to ARIN and the ITF, there's a lot of very smart, good people to talk to and to collaborate with to get things done, to make actually the internet more safe and secure. So I think best practices, really number one is participation, just being there. Second is actually knowing what the topic is, what the subject is, being able to articulate your own position and also know the positions of others. And from there is to collaborate, to work effectively with the partners who are at the multi-stakeholder organizations such as ICANN, ARIN, the ITF, to ensure that you're all moving in the same direction. So from my perspective, I guess I would emphasize those three things, is to participate openly and transparently, and to cooperate and collaborate with all the stakeholders.
A very fine list of attributes for a best practice for multi-stakeholder practice. Thank you. So next I have Grace Gitaiga, who's Associate at Kenya ICT Action Network, KICANET. Thanks.
Before I came here, we had a meeting as the Africa grouping where we were looking at what multi-stakeholderism means for us. And one of the things that we agreed is that there is actually multi-stakeholderism happening in Africa. However, it is uncoordinated, it is erratic, and it has not been institutionalized, and sometimes it is not transparent. Some people also felt that multi-stakeholderism for Africa is complex. You know, what exactly is it? What is the definition? How do you go about multi-stakeholderism? And how critical is it to Africa vis-a-vis other critical issues like land issues, water issues? So, you know, there was that debate. However, for me, and in terms of best practices, I think multi-stakeholderism needs trust. And I'm speaking that from the perspective of Africa, that there is need for each stakeholder to recognize the unique purpose of various stakeholders, and that they are also experts in their own way in the policy matter that is under discussion. There's also the need to recognize that each stakeholder does bring something onto the table that is useful to the rest of the society, and that each stakeholder has actually a role in shaping the policy process in question. There's therefore, in terms of trust and building trust, the need to recognize that these processes must reflect views of different stakeholders in whatever final outcomes that will be agreed in a policy process. And if views of certain stakeholders are not reflected, then there's need to provide legitimate reasons for that lack of incorporation. Either they didn't meet some certain threshold, either they are not grounded in law, or they cannot be practical, maybe they are offensive to the public morals. Just provide the stakeholders with why they're in, their views cannot be incorporated. And finally, on the issue of trust, that actions must be taken in light of what stakeholders have provided, to just avoid suspicions and to encourage the need to work together and build society.
And we'll be coming back to that topic of trust a little later in this discussion, so thanks for bringing it to the beginning. Next, I have Susie Hargreaves, CEO of Internet Watch Foundation. Please go.
Thanks very much. I run the Internet Watch Foundation, which is the UK hotline for reporting child sexual abuse content, most successful hotline in the world, and the UK now hosts less than 1% of known child sexual abuse content, down from 18% in 1996. And the reason we are able to do that is we're a multi-stakeholder organisation. We're a charity and self-regulatory body, but we work with all the groups that need to work together, independent of law enforcement and the government, but everybody who needs to work together gets together to fight this problem. So that means that we're funded by the internet industry, and the industry, the police, government, the public, civil society, academia, and ourselves all work together to develop a shared goal. And I think that the issue around child protection, where we have lots of examples of multi-stakeholder working which works, and I know it's low-hanging fruit in terms of the fact that we can all get behind a particular issue, but I think we can show how people who traditionally won't sit in a room together will when they believe in something. And I'm going to cover some issues around trust later. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Byron Holland, CEO, Canadian Internet Registration Authority, CIRA.
Thank you. We're the folks who manage the CCTLD for Canada and do .ca. So I'm going to talk or provide a few thoughts on accountability. And I do that as a practitioner, somebody who has to run an accountable organization that delivers on a public service with a public mandate. So accountability is often thought of and discussed in conceptual terms or theoretical terms or principles, a fairly high-level dialogue. But at the end of the day, you have to deliver it on the ground and make it real. And those are some of the things that I wanted to speak about. Because in my experience, accountability is one of the most critical aspects of delivering on a multi-stakeholder organization. And I would say it's also one of the most challenging. Because when we talk about multi-stakeholderism, to a great degree, we're talking about the processes themselves that make it up, the processes by which communities or groups or multiple communities come together and deliver a solution or an outcome. And for that outcome to have legitimacy, even among potential, quote, losers or people who didn't get their way, there's got to be trust in that process. And that's a significant challenge. Accountability is just plain hard work. Some of you probably were in the session this morning when we spent over an hour and a half talking about accountability and still didn't necessarily come to any concrete conclusions. But it really starts, I would say, with effective bylaws. But those become, in a sense, just the table stakes, the bylaws, the elections, the words on paper. But we've all seen organizations, both in the private sector and the not-for-profit sector, who have good bylaws, good paper, and get themselves into significant trouble in terms of accountability. So it's more than just that. It's table stakes, but it's not enough. I think that we have to be really sure that the organization's members are very engaged in whatever the issues of the day are. And that's one of the most significant challenges. It takes commitment by the organization. It takes resources to engage members or stakeholders. And above all, it takes a considerable amount of just plain work. And I'll use some examples in our experience at CIRA. We are a member-based organization. Anybody who has a .ca can become a member. It's free, so the barrier to entry is very, very low. And anybody who has a .ca can become a member. But members themselves play a fundamental role in generating accountability. We have direct elections for our board, for example, by the members. And the challenge there is, while in theory that's great, it's how do you make sure that you have enough high-quality board candidates who have to be members? How do you get enough members actually engaged in the election process? Because if you, in theory, run a reasonably performing organization, there aren't a lot of things in the domain space right now in Canada that are generating controversy. It's like the power. We turn it on, it works, it's relatively cheap, we're okay with it. How do you get members engaged in that environment? So we've been doing a number of things on the ground. We do member events, we create forums, we participate in various trade shows, all on the ground activities that take time, money, and effort, but we believe are absolutely critical in engaging the membership and generating more members who will then participate in the election process, who therefore confer legitimacy in the outcome of the board, and the board itself, through its decisions, build trust because of high quality decisions and outputs. And it all starts with that basic hard work on the ground with the appropriate resources. And that, to me, is where accountability really starts.
And we'll be coming back to the accountability subject a little later, so hopefully you'll be able to add even more. So that'd be good. Great, thank you. And our last speaker in this first round is Izumi Okutani, Policy Liaison at JPN. Oh, and Jimson. I'm sorry, and then Jimson. I'm so sorry, I didn't have you in my list, forgive me, because you were added later and I built off an old list. Forgive me. Find you again.
Hi everyone, my name is Izumi Okutani, and I'm engaged in the community that develops policies for IP address, which is one of the critical internet resources. And something else that I'm recently engaged is trying to nurture a platform where several different stakeholders within Japan is able to come and have discussions together. You may be a little bit surprised that we don't really have this multi-stakeholder platform within Japan, where we do have very developed the internet infrastructure, and we do have very active technical communities discussing various internet issues. However, when it comes to the issue of internet governance, people really don't have very clear ideas about what the issues at stake is, and when I use the word multi-stakeholder, people don't know what it means. So I would like to add some practical specific ways on how we may be able to help in cases when there is no multi-stakeholder environment. And one of the things that we've done is we've set up a platform, but just setting up the platform and saying, okay, it's open to everybody, it's not going to help people to participate. So you really have to identify who are the stakeholders in our local context, and then proactively reach out to these individual people and explaining to them, okay, these are the issues that are being discussed. And for example, spam or privacy, those things, people think that it's really an issue that's related to them. But when you put it in the package of internet governance, people think it's something not related to them. So you have to create this link and make people to understand that these are the issues that relate to them, and to engage and encourage them to participate more in the platform that we have. Another point that I would like to add, in case we want to reach a consensus or agreement on a particular point, or have a specific action, then instead of having one-time meeting, it might be helpful to have more continuous kind of engagement, something that Sebastian has raised as well. An example that I would be able to share is the forum that we have in the address management policy development, where we have biannual meetings plus mailing lists. So this helps people to continuously engage in discussions and be able to feel that they have this forum anytime that they want to engage, they can do that. This may be a little bit of a challenge in case it's the more global multi-stakeholder with much more different stakeholders being involved in addition to the technical community. But if we are more specific enough in a topic, for example, this best practices forums, I think there are 5 things being picked up rather than just, hey, let's discuss about internet governance discussions in general. This may be something that we're able to engage in people and try to reach some kind of agreement. So those are the observations that I'm making based on my experience. And I would like to speak a little bit more later on stakeholders.
Thank you very much. And last, this time, truly last, is Jimson Olufuye, and I'm sorry I didn't check to make sure I could pronounce your last name. I've been using your first name for so long, who's a ICC basis from Africa, and I don't know specifically what business you have to give the name, but please.
Thank you, Avery. Well, my name again is Jimson Olufuye, and that is quite close to your pronunciation. It's okay, you did well. I represent Africa ICT Alliance. It's a private sector-led organization to promote private sector participation in the multi-stakeholder dialogue going on globally. And yes, as you said, we're also a part of ICC basis and also the business constituency of ICANN. So I have some kind of reference points with my presentation at this hour. Well, first and foremost, I want to talk about governance. Just like Holland mentioned, he's talking about accountability. I'm looking at the governance framework. A best practice for a multi-stakeholder setting must follow a predefined governance framework in the sense that there has to be a secretariat, basically. There has to be focal points for driving the activities of the policy framework for the multi-stakeholder organization. Again, there has to be some form of equal footing for all stakeholders. Like in ICANN, there is a lot of opportunity for developing nation participation. This is quite important. But in some other areas or multi-stakeholder environment, they feel that private sector is private sector, so they have all the resources. No, it's not true from developing countries. In developing nations, many are really just concerned about basic life sustenance. And so coming to Istanbul or Bali is extra luxury. So you need to encourage them, like the USG encourage the private sector at the initial stage of internet development, even in Europe. And so that needs to happen too in Africa, to bring in these stakeholders in developing countries to be on the table on equal footing so that their opinions can also be heard and they can also mature. Another thing I've observed within ICANN as a reference, because I'm involved and also ICC basis about audit, there is a review process to see how we performing. So that is quite important when it comes to your governance framework. How is it performing? Is everybody involved? Are you transparent indeed? Are you trustworthy even in your relationship with one another? So audit is very important, auditing process, periodic audit, is it after 2 years or after 3 years? Review of your performance over the years. So that is quite important as well. And a best practice also that has worked very well in ICANN, through which a number of us have been involved, is, as we also see in this forum, is remote participation using technology. Technology is being used very well to ensure that voices are heard, especially in ICANN, the business constituency, and also the ICC basis. So any organization that is concerned about best practice for multi-stakeholderism must be focused also on use of technology, appropriate technology for remote participation, so that if funding is not there for people to be there, where the discussion is going on, they can also participate remotely. Thank you.
And thank you all for the introductory statements, and thank you all for keeping them close to the 2 minutes I had asked for. Most of them didn't go much over, a little, but not much. The next part of this is basically taking a couple of the themes that were broken out in the paper. And I've asked, and the way I've asked to do it is that each one of those themes will have a short statement made by one of the panelists and then open up on that particular subject to the rest of the participants around the table and in the room. I'm going to try and keep each one fairly short, like 10 minutes or less, just because this is just really getting the conversation started. I'm really hoping that we go beyond this to get the conversation. this is coming basically out of the paper that was created, and that the content from this meeting, as well as future conversations, will be fodder for future versions of the paper. So, in terms of starting this, basically there were 5 topics that sort of came out. There was the definitions, attributes, and commonalities in multi-stakeholder practice, a discussion on stakeholders, a discussion on trust, one on accountability and transparency, and then I'll talk a little bit about next steps and get some more feedback on that. So first, I'd like to ask Norbert to basically give a couple minutes on basically getting us started on the discussion on definitions, attributes, and commonalities of the multi-stakeholder practice and best practice in that. Thank you.
Okay, so one definition that has been proposed, I'm going to read it, and I try not to read too fast so that you have a chance to actually reflect, is this a good definition or not? So the proposed definition goes like this: the study and practice of forms of participatory democracy that allow for all who have a stake and who have an inclination to participate on an equal footing in the deliberation of issues and the recommendation of solutions. Now, I want to be a bit provocative so that we get to an actual discussion, and first question the idea of having equal footing in a public policy discussion, recognizing that there are vast differences of power. Some stakeholders are much more powerful than others. Well, we can put them on chairs around the table, tell them, do discuss on an equal footing, but the question is that going to create a reality of equal footing or not? I would like to further provoke by quoting from the directives of an organization which is not very well liked in the internet community, the standardization organizations ISO and IEC, which say in their directives, the consensus process involves seeking to take into account the views of all parties concerned and to reconcile any conflicting arguments. For me, this captures very well what I appreciate about a multi-stakeholder process, even if it does not use the word. This definition is ancient. It goes back way beyond before the term multi-stakeholder became popular. One point I would like to raise is somehow all these processes are in English. Isn't there some parties concerned who do not speak English, who are somehow excluded by our choice of language from being able to participate in any way? And well, while I appreciate the UN best practice of having interpretation in 6 languages, just having some sessions at the IGF in 6 languages does not actually empower anyone to effectively participate into a policy-making process. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So would anyone like to sort of respond to that, to take that on, or perhaps add another point? Yes, please, Konstantinos.
Thank you, Avery, for the transcript. This is Konstantinos Komaitis with the Internet Society. So, as an alternative, perhaps to consider the definition that came out from Net Mundial on multi-stakeholder processes, and whether we could compile the 2 definitions. We have a document. It is an outcome document that was agreed. The definition, I think, that came out of this process is very close to the Net Mundial. So I was wondering, for issues of consistency as well, whether it might be a good idea to try to compile them in order to have some sort of consistency in terms of terminology as an idea.
I think the process over the year will be to take any number of definitions, the net mundial being one of them, you know, perhaps the ISO one, you know, there's any number of them. So certainly, you know, combining multiple definitions into one that we can reach consensus on would probably be it in terms of finding common definitions. So when you're speaking of another document, you're speaking of your contribution of comments that was appended to the main document, or you're speaking of the Net Mundial document?
The Net Mundial one.
So we should definitely take that definition as we move forward and see how we can blend all those. Yes, Chuck.
Thanks, Aubrey, and thanks for that introduction. I always have trouble with the word equal. Maybe it's because of my background's in math, and that may be my handicap. But in the multi-stakeholder model, is it ever really possible in reality to have equal? I think that's a great goal. But when you have language differences, some are translated, some are not. When you have people with different financial means that can attend in person and some cannot, and so forth. Now, what's the better word? I don't know. I think that's a good goal, but I think we also need to be realistic. What's the right word, or what's the right phrase to say it? I'm not sure. But we use that word all the time, equal. And yet, it's almost impossible in a truly multi-stakeholder environment to do that unless you have unlimited resources, which we don't have.
Yep. Did I see it? Oh, yes. I don't see. Yes, please.
This is Isami. Many of the questions that Norbert raised are very relevant to my situation because I am trying to build people in the Japanese community to also participate in global discussions. And the issue of language is very something of a concern. But at the same time, it's not very realistic for UN to ask for translation for all the languages. So I think something that maybe the national or regional IGF can play is raise awareness within your local community and then have more people who have thoughts, and then maybe not everybody can physically participate, but the point that I think earlier gentleman raised about remote participation, or have someone who can represent and give feedbacks in the global IGF, that might be something that it might not be a perfect solution and equal in the way that Chuck has mentioned, but might change the situation a little bit.
Sebastian.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to add on what Itsumi was saying. And talking about the specific cases that I referred before, we participate very actively in the Latin America and Caribbean IGF, which is held every year. And we do have translation for the 3 main languages that are spoken in the region. I mean, we are still having some languages out. Our region speaks more than 3 languages, but we do have English, Spanish, and Portuguese there. We are missing the French in Haiti, for instance, the Creole, and some languages from the Caribbean, the Dutch, that is spoken in many islands. But I think there is something in between. But I think also I would like to refer from what our colleague said from Africa said about the how far and how difficult it is for people, mostly from developing countries, to reach strange places like Istanbul or Bali or Baku or etc. But I think the 2 things comes together when you think the whole process as an aggregation process that could be so in that way. I mean, having strong capillarity in our internet governance, multi-stakeholder processes, where it starts with national, that aggregates into sub-regionals, regionals, and then globals. And that's something that could We, at least in our region, we can imagine something like that happening, and we set up our regional, and we are setting up national IGFs in order to work that way, preceding the global one, in order to feed the next level in a bottom-up fashion, if you care. Thank you.
Yep. Basically, I have time to take one more comment on this topic before I move on to the next one. If there is one last comment that someone, yes, Jimson, please.
Just to quickly buttress the fact that nationally, I think in Nigeria it has balanced out. We have, you can say, equal participation, so to speak. But regionally, that is where the challenge is. When I mentioned that we need to see a business, because if it's happening, for example, maybe in Ethiopia, and there are people in the Gambia or in Tunisia, if you want private sector representing them to come, that is, there has to be some form of encouragement at this, at this level of internet governance in that region. So the point again is to use technology, really, if we're to balance out. But if people need to prioritize what is the return on investment, for me, for business, really. And that is usually the case for business, because today one of the panels that was issued that why you don't see private sector at the regional level, and I try to explain that. And I'm glad to say that even UNDESA has recognized it, that even developing nations, businesses, just as they encourage the civil society from developing nations to participate, even the business sector too needs to be encouraged at a point like this, until maturity. That's the point. And on the language, yes, there's always a challenge of equality over many spheres, but it's a goal. The goal is a good goal, and perhaps down the line, through technology and automatic translation, that could be possible to overcome the language barrier, but it's a clear, distinct, good goal to set, equal footing for everyone. And in Nigeria today, we are beginning to get that, but it was not so before. It was not so before, but right now, all stakeholders are involved in order a true multi-stakeholder approach, and with a charter, so to speak, a framework, a governance framework to guide it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm hoping that we continue this discussion on the list after this meeting, but that was a very good presentation of many different points. Moving on now to the second topic, which was stakeholders. And Izumi kind of give us a lead into that.
Okay. So I think there are a couple of ways we can interpret the word stakeholders. One is stakeholder groupings in the way that is listed in the document. I can't list them all, but for example, civil society, the government, business, etc., etc. And the other way of interpreting stakeholders, not to be too binded with these groupings, but consider in the people who are affected by a certain policy implementation. And so when you think about why is multi-stakeholder important, is how I understand it, is a bit based on the spirit that when you consider policy implementation, it's very important that everybody who's affected is informed and be able to give inputs. And so if you consider in that aspect, depending on the issue, maybe stakeholder is different. And also, even within a stakeholder group, maybe a stakeholder for spam in technical community may be different from a stakeholder group in contents creation, for example. So when you think about stakeholder groups, maybe a good reference, but you might want to be careful and not fall into just groupings and think, okay, we've ticked all the stakeholder groups and we've engaging everybody. And so I want to share this observation and would love to hear what others think about it.
Thank you. I've always liked it when somebody brings in the tick the box problem, because that seems to be something that happens so very frequently. So I'm wondering, would anyone else like to comment on the subject of stakeholders at this point? Please, introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Daria Catalui. I work in e-education in European Network Information Security Agency. It's ENISA. Maybe some of you know it. I just want to share an insight regarding the stakeholder definition. I coordinate the European Cybersecurity Month, which is every October, and I can tell you already that only when you present and you introduce in your presentations the word stakeholder, you already lost some of the audience. So basically, it's a very technical term for the majority of the common users. Also, if people in the same room come from different backgrounds and different stakeholder communities, then they will not have the same understanding on the stakeholder. So we use it a lot in all our reports that we publish them, but it's mainly a very bureaucratic word that we use mainly for those that we know what it means. For the grassroots communities, I tend to use explanations, and I lead the process in such a way that we conclude that, okay, this was a stakeholder consultation, so they already know what it means, the stakeholder, in not the English word, because the English word everybody knows, but the content of it.
Thank you. That's a very good comment, very important comment. We forget. Thank you. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Ricardo Poppe. I work for Brazilian government's General Secretariat of Brazilian Presidency, responsible to dealing with participation, political participation. I think the concerns that I would address and bring to the table that connects to others is we get out of a good experience by dealing with a big consultation for Arena Net Mundial that was in parallel of Net Mundial in April, that was counted with the involvement of more than 2,000 people, and the language we used was not related to the language commonly used on internet governance forums, was a very grassroots language. The question was, what internet do you want? What do you want for you? And the proposals were very connected to the everyday use of the users, but then we systematized it in axis that could cover quality of access and liberty of expressions and or other themes. And this experience leads us to the reflection of when the multi-stakeholder environment is producing public policy, it's important that they are that they are doing a representation of the society as a whole. And how is it possible to do this connection, drinking on this experience of the everyday internet user? How to, first of all, mobilize this user that the matters of internet governance affects its everyday life, and how he can contribute with the debate. And maybe I will provoke a reflection on the answer for this question. Maybe we are missing a sector in this multi-stakeholder model, maybe the sector that can help with this connection culturally, something like that.
Thank you. And I think one of the problems and one of the processes is to try and make sure that we don't miss sectors. So I think that part of the exercise is indeed, how do we figure out how not to miss sectors as they create. Any other comment on this topic? Yes, please, Norbert.
Thank you. One thing that I'm always concerned about when I hear this stakeholder categorizing, and I say this as someone who is really proud of being civil society. I'm happy to be civil society. For me, it's not a problem to associate with that, but the question is, how useful is the category of civil society nowadays? When the modern state of Switzerland was created in 1848, there was one political party that had all the seats in parliament, but over time there came more political parties, and now we have quite a number of them. And maybe we need this kind of process also within our stakeholder categories, that people are not just identified as being civil society or business, but we may need to create groupings within these categories reflecting different viewpoints and helping people with one or the other kind of subgroup of this stakeholder grouping to somehow coordinate and help reduce the overall complexity of the picture by aggregating similar viewpoints. Thank you.
So I like that notion of aggregation, and one quote that I've heard a couple times from people is, when we go home at night, we're all civil society. So indeed, it does make it difficult to differentiate those different meetings, and those of us that are active in civil society view it differently than those who say, I'm civil society when I go home at night. Anyone else would like to comment on this particular topic before moving on to the next? Yes.
Yes, just a small comment regarding your remarks on his intervention. In my perspective, multi-stakeholderism means that every single interested party has to have no barriers in order to participate. Instead of, we have the duty of bringing people, because it might be the case that some stakeholders don't want to participate. I mean, and we have to be open to that. So I think we should focus more on enabling the possibility to participate instead of just concentrating on bringing all together. I mean, we have to get everyone together here. That's just a small comment. Thank you.
That's a good way to end this particular segment and move on, as we've got to bring in everyone. Okay, thank you. Okay, now the next topic was trust. And I have two people that will do a introductory comment, and then we'll move on to open discussion. The first one would be Susie Hargreaves. Would you like to speak of trust?
Okay, thanks very much. I just wanted to say on the stakeholder issue that, I guess the reason why I think our organisation works is that our stakeholders have all got something at stake, so they're going to lose or gain from the situation if they are involved. And I think that applies to how you can deal with the imbalance within stakeholders. So, for example, the problem we're trying to resolve, online child sexual abuse, is not solvable without all stakeholders of all sizes working together, and there has to be an acknowledgement of that. So how do we gain people's trust? Well, first of all, they have to have a common goal, and sometimes they have a range of multiple motivations within that common goal, but absolutely there has to be the common goal that's there first and foremost. And for us, it's also about transparency and accountability, and we do that through an independent board. We have independent processes, and we have an independent appeals and complaints process. And this also ensures that there's balance within the stakeholders involved. We also make sure that we learn from mistakes, and that our board applies a level of scrutiny to what we do, and actually that's a kind of constantly evolving issue. And the main reason I think the multi-stakeholder partnership works is the results. We actually have practical results which we publish and we build on, and we're an effective partnership. And ultimately, if it's not effective, it's not going to achieve any results. So that's hugely important. And the last thing I just wanted to say was, so actually, no, I think I covered everything. Thank you. Thanks.
And Bobby Flame, you.
Sure. I'll definitely echo everything that Susie just said. And I also wanted to steal also what Byron said, because he said quality decision and outputs equals trust. And I think that is very important. The only thing I could add to trust also would be, transparency, having a connection, follow through if people are asking you of things and they're expecting things to follow through and to make sure whether you say you can do it or not. And consistency. Are you the same person? Are you acting the same way with everyone? And are you being, correct in what you say and what you do, and also doing that on a consistent basis? So I think that's really kind of the basis for trust. I know when I first started coming to ICANN and Aaron, law enforcement always has a very strong reaction either one way or another. And I know when I came, I was like, what are you doing here? You know, why is the FBI here? And, you know, what's happening? What's going on? And just by being there and being the same person and showing that, you know, trying to be an equal and fruitful partner and stakeholder, I think has benefited my organization a lot.
Thank you. So, anyone else wish to comment on the subject of trust? Yes, please, Gibson.
Thank you. Really, trust is a very big word, really. Very, very critical word in that say, I trust you that you will deliver. And so I expect you to deliver. It's really big, but many times you find out that it's broken one way or the other. And so, just as Susie mentioned, a key element of ensuring trust is maintained is transparency. Transparency throughout the process, the auditing process. In fact, that's why auditing is quite important, you know, checking the process again. So, but trust is actually key for us moving forward. But for trust, I will not be here. Many of us will not be here. We trusted that, you know, this will happen, this event is going to happen, and based on the record that's been published before. So I just want to underscore that transparency is very key to ensure trust is sustained. And trust is actually a big word, and is good for cohesion in the multi-stakeholder environment and for multi-stakeholderism. Thank you.
Yes, please, Grace, and then.
I think coming from an environment where we have seen, for example, mistrust among stakeholders, especially because for us the threat sometimes is government, sometimes it's businesses. And trust really, I think in talking about trust, probably some of the questions we need to ask ourselves is whether then we need to accord governments that special status in any multi-stakeholder process, or whether it is possible for them to participate like any other stakeholder grouping. And it's the same for businesses. So in terms of, you know, trusting each other, what role is each bringing into the process? The second thing is, when we participate, do we trust each other? Do we see value in participating in processes? Do we see value in bringing our voices onto the table? And I think that will need to be very clear. And finally, in multi-stakeholderism, and for us to trust each other, do we actually need to define who is a stakeholder? And I guess that might take us into bigger debates or debates that will never end. And, you know, do we need to actually define an approach on which stakeholder participates in these processes, so that we don't, you know, we don't lose trust?
Thank you. It is interesting how we are beginning to see that while these things sort of get divided, they really do start to affect each other and contain elements of another. Please, Byron.
Thank you. Yeah, just picking up on the trust motif, I mean, it's easy to say, and I'm sure we've all heard it. Trust takes a long time to build, and it's very easy to destroy. Long time to earn and easy to spend. And I think that's something we should pay particular attention to when we think about sustainable multi-stakeholder mechanisms that we may want to build or foster or continue to encourage. And in particular, and the paper itself speaks a little bit to this, is when there's fundamental imbalance in the power dynamic between various stakeholders. So all stakeholders may be equal, in parentheses, or in quotations, in some way, in that they have equal opportunity maybe to speak around a table like this. But if there's a fundamental imbalance in the actual power, a government representative versus a single civil society actor, for example, then we need to have mechanisms in place that realistically recognize that and try to find an appropriate balance that enables trust to build. Because when there's a fundamental imbalance in power, I believe there's going to be an inherent lack of trust until it's built up or accommodated for in some way, shape, or form. So as we build these mechanisms, as we sustain these mechanisms, I think we need to make sure we take that into account.
Yep. Any other comments? Yes, please.
I think there is one thing important about trust is to relate trust with legitimacy. There is different things that relate to each other. Trust is related about how strong is the mechanism of multi-stakeholder in all sectors, and people trusting each other that the decisions and the agreeds on the forum will be kept. But if you have a weak mechanisms or a mechanism without trust, it affects the legitimacy of the mechanism by the whole as is seen by the whole country or the whole people. And that's the point that I think connects with the participation. But because if you have reacting what he said in the finish of the other panel, if we talk about lowering barriers for people participating, we maybe should look how we are dealing with these barriers, which barriers we're talking about, because sometimes people are not participating not because they don't want, but because they can't understand what's going on. So it's because that's why I told about sectors and all this stuff, because we even in civil society we work in a matter of organized civil society, and there is the citizens that don't see itself in organized civil society, and they have no means to participate. That's related to more legitimacy than to trust, but I think that's correlated.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a note for the transcribers that wasn't Jimson speaking. I'm not sure I remember your name. Was it Roberto? Edgardo, sorry. I just wanted to make sure that it got the right name. Please. Okay, so okay, all of a sudden three comments. You wanted to comment some more, and then you did, and I forgot your name again. So, and then you wanted a last comment, and okay, sure.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to comment about how you build the trust in the first place. So, you know, you could say our situation is very a mature relationship, but we're trying to set up a similar situation in a number of countries in Africa, where we have a situation where industry won't even go in the same room as law enforcement, and you know, we're having to start from scratch. And actually, I think that's where the role of trusted intermediaries comes in, and that actually, you know, that there is a role that people can play who can prove that we can show results in good multi-stakeholder working. And it's a hell of a long journey to go on, and I acknowledge that, but actually, you know, the journey has to start somewhere, and actually that's where we can take models of good practice where it has worked and actually not impose, because every country is different and culturally different, and we need to be aware of that and the cultural sensitivities, but actually use that experience to really help build those partnerships.
Thank you. Please quickly give your name again. And I've gone over the time I wanted on this segment, so please.
Okay, I will be quick. I'm Daria. I just want to make it more complex a bit, because from my work experience, trust relates to more things. Is the trust in between the two people, between the organizations, the trust in the system, and the trust in the process. So while building a multi-stakeholder approach, we have to take into account all these separate things, which can be somehow conflicting. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian Belagan. But yeah, taking the third one, the trust on the process, I would say there's three components which are very important for that. One is transparency, how decisions are taken. The second one would be accountability. What do you do when you take a decision? I mean, how you behave after that. And the third one, which is very important, is predictability. I mean, the whole system has to be predictable for all players. So that's something that I wanted to highlight.
Thank you, and it's a wonderful lead into the next topic, which was accountability and transparency, but perhaps we also should add predictability to that. Byron, I don't know if you spoke about that in the beginning, and you spoke of bylaws, and you spoke of good CEOs and how they're chosen. I don't know if you wanted to add anything more to kick this off, or should I just open that?
Sure, maybe I'll say a couple of things, because I think as this conversation is moving on, we see more and more clearly the interrelationship of all of these elements. And when we talk about accountability, you were just saying with trust, with legitimacy, and how do you actually order those? And I think that the multi-stakeholder environment, of course, is, as I said at the beginning, is based on different stakeholders coming together to try to find a solution or come to a common goal or outcome. And how do you do that in a way that's legitimate when we have very different perceived and actual power balances within those different stakeholder environments? How do the winners and losers in an outcome both believe that it's a legitimate outcome still and can live with it? And that legitimacy, I think, is based on having trust in the processes and the organizations that are involved. And part of that is having clear intent at the outset. And maybe if I could just offer a short parable that can provide kind of an actual example of something we experienced that I think could be a good example overall, and that's within the IXP world in Canada. So internet exchange points were very underrepresented in Canada. Because of our geography in the US, all our internet traffic went north-south based on old telco lines, etc. As a result, almost no internet exchange points in Canada. In 2011, my organization was working on this and concerned about it, and we thought, how can we start to stimulate internet exchange points across Canada so we can have an east-west environment, not a north-south environment? And this is also, I think, interesting in the ICANN context, because at some point somebody has to lead, even in a multi-stakeholder environment. Things don't just happen spontaneously. We want to have organic things, but somebody has to plant the seed, right, essentially? So part of it is being in an organization where you're accountable to various stakeholders, the internet, the ISP community, government, et cetera, like we tend to be, as well as our members and other stakeholders. But we decided that it would be worthwhile to make an investment in trying to start more IXPs. We started with clear intent by commissioning expert third-party research. We brought in Packet Clearinghouse, Dr. Edelman from Harvard, did pure research in the Canadian context, made it freely available to all, published it, promoted it. It obviously articulated the landscape, which showed a dearth of IXPs. And then we started reaching out to communities and saying, we think your community, based on population and other things, would be a good environment for IXPs. We're not in the IXP business. We'd love to be a member, because you know what? There's a global best practice. They're member-based, not-for-profit organizations that generally run quality IXPs. So here's a model. And we can help, but we don't want to run it. And we got mixed messages back. There was trust in some areas, lack of trust in others. But we were very clear in our intent. We provided expert third-party opinion freely available to all, and we said, we'll help, but we are not in the business of running IXPs. And we had very different experiences across Canada. And the good news is we have 3 times as many IXPs today as we did 2.5 years ago. Now, when you start with a low number, of course, you can triple it. But the good news is we have tripled the number of IXPs in spite of very different power relationships between, say, CIRA and tiny little IXPs in small communities. Yet, by being clear with our intent, by living up to what we said, which is we're not going to come in and take it over, run it. There's no unanticipated outcome here. It's clear, it's predictable. All of those things came together to, even in the environments where there was lack of trust, build trust, gain legitimacy, particularly when, after we helped for a while, we pulled back as we said we would and said, we're not here to run it. We want to be a member like the rest of you guys. That's it. That built legitimacy and credibility, and because we were firm on the one thing, that we believed in a particular model, that model has also conferred accountability to the IXPs, whereas in some cases, the initial thoughts of IXP members would not have been able to confer that final level of accountability to those individual organizations. So all of my point really is, all of those pieces are hard won, but critical to providing good accountability for each, in this case, individual member-based IXP.
Thank you, and I think it's very good to have, we've had a couple examples here, and I think as this work progresses, it will be good to, you know, collect more of them and get some of them documented. Could take a couple more people on this, on this topic of accountability and transparency and perhaps predictability. Would anyone else like to contribute to that at the moment? If not, I'll move on, but yes, please, Bill.
Hi, Bill Graham speaking as an individual. It strikes me that it's really healthy to hear the amount of discussion that's going on these days in a number of environments about accountability. I still really struggle, and I'm hoping the work going forward over the next year can help with this. I still really struggle with coming to an understanding of what people mean by accountability, in the sense of accountability for who, to who, for what. And what I hear most of the discussion focusing on is a kind of top-down accountability, where a decision maker is accountable to the people affected by the decision. But it strikes me in a multi-stakeholder process, there's also got to be a level of accountability on the part of the stakeholders to the decision-making or the decision-implementing entity. And I don't hear that being the topic of accountability being brought into that full circle kind of discussion, because, you know, certainly there are many, many ways that organizations that are implementing decisions need to improve their accountability. But I really feel like, drawing on my own experience, for example, on the ICANN board, I don't feel I have a good sense of how people making representations to the board are accountable to their communities, and how they're accountable for supporting a decision or an implementation once it's made. Thanks.
Yeah, it was very good to actually hear the notion of circular, because there is that whole notion that in an accountability, you basically have to keep going around in the circle and reaching down and moving back up. So thank you for bringing in circles. Would anyone else like to add a comment on accountability and transparency? Yes, please, Chuck.
Chuck Gomes from VeriSign. One of the things we often do is confuse the two. They're both absolutely essential, but having transparency is not the same thing as having accountability.
Let's say accountability is impossible without transparency, so they are indeed different things. Any last words on accountability and transparency before I move on to the last item? No? Okay. So basically the last item before I give each of the panelists a chance to make a closing remark is the next steps. Now, I don't know if, Constance, if you would like to say something about this whole environment. I mentioned a little bit about the beginning, that this was sort of the beginning of a process that we would like to basically continue working on in some manner throughout the year. Not quite sure yet. We're kind of figuring out what it means to work through the year at IGF, and then have an outcome at next year's. But if you could add a little bit more about the overall process of the best practices, or what I'm trying to get us to call current best practices, because I think best practices change over time. But.
Thank you very much, Avri, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm Constance Baumler from the Internet Society. So I will, as Avri has requested, give some background information on these new tracks, the IGF Best Practices Forums. It was felt last year coming out of Net Mundial and listening to the call that was expressed through the Net Mundial principles that it would be necessary for the IGF to strengthen its outcomes. And we're not talking here about creating a process where people would negotiate on text, but rather on specific issues such as spam, such as establishing certs, developing meaningful multi-stakeholder mechanisms, online child protection, and the development of local content. These were the 5 tracks for this year's IGF Best Practices Forums. The intent was to gather all the relevant experts, document existing or current best practices, make that information available on the IGF website, because we've been hearing over and over that after the IGF has ended, it's important for stakeholders to be able to go to the IGF website and find relevant information, find the list of lead experts, find the publications of research and any relevant documents relating to a specific topic. I've said that the initial objective was to gather information on current best practices. It is also, and because it is mentioned in the Tunis agenda, if possible, when possible, to identify common ground among stakeholders, among existing best practices, to recognize, to acknowledge that there is consensus. And this is the possible outcomes that these different groups, these different tracks are working towards. Again, it's very important for the IGF to start strengthening its working procedures without becoming a negotiating body. And this new experiment that we are starting with the best practices forums, it is a beginning. It will go on. The work will continue intersessionally between IGF Istanbul and IGF Brazil. And we're counting on lead experts around this table to take the work forward. But again, this is on a voluntary basis. When experts are done with a topic, the discussion should die, and we should move on to the next relevant topic. Thank you.
We're close to out of time, so I basically would like to now turn to the panelists and ask each of them, and I'm going to go in reverse alphabetical order this time, simply because we've got to pick an ordering. And basically just in a minute or so, but close to a minute, give a sort of what you think is among the most important things that we need to take away with us as we move into sort of continuing to work on this. So Jimson, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to also see this as a marathon, not a sprint. In that we have to see it through the long-term perspective that we want this process to work. It is the best approach, because I recall when we started in Nigeria, there was really confusion. There were fightings among all stakeholders until the president called everybody and said, all of you, business, all of you, civil society, go and sit down and work it out among yourselves. I want peace. And that's the end. Since 2005, it's continued to work. And we need to now review consistently. There has to be a consistent review of the process and involvement. So awareness is very important. And so some other governments, especially in Africa, they are concerned about what are the outcomes? Is there anything tangible we can take away? So I think this is one of those important things that we can come out with. We can say, these are things happening. These are best practices happening. And they say, okay, really? Oh, yes, yes. So I think this is a very good workshop. And we need to focus more on this going forward, not until the next IGF, but even throughout the intermediary period up to the next IGF. Thank you.
Izumi, please.
Yes, I think these discussions have been very useful in confirming what are the understandings about the common concept, and I've observed some of the common grounds and deepened some observations about each of the concepts. And what I would be interested in seeing additionally is specific actions or examples of the things that are being taken to address and realize some of the concept. I think that would make the document much more practical and useful.
Thanks. 3 comments. And in part what I've heard around here is I think it's important that as we build what are the new best practices or evolve the current best practices, that there be an enhanced focus on predictability. And that's something that I think is important. I think we should at least have a conversation or maybe even acknowledge that what we're looking for to a great degree is equality of opportunity, not necessarily equality of outcome. As long as everybody can participate in a meaningful way, it doesn't mean that we all have to always have the same outcome, particularly in relation to the different kinds of constituencies involved in a given topic, whatever it may be, and that the mechanisms at least recognize, if not celebrate or are very positive about the fact that there are very different power balances within the various stakeholder groups, and take advantage of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Susie.
One of the things I'd like to leave is don't discount models of good practice in multi-stakeholder working that exists in child protection and cybersecurity and cybercrime, because we do have the same issues. It's not easier. We work with exactly the same governments, law enforcement, internet companies as other issues. So I would say, learn from our experience as well, because we do have some models of good practice. Thank you.
Thank you. A very good suggestion. Grace, please.
What I'm about to say, I know maybe people will not agree with me, but that's from our experience. And it is that we need to understand that when people come into processes, they are coming with an interest. There is therefore need to understand that different stakeholders have different interests in whatever processes that are there. For example, when we are working with governments, and now I understand after what happened in Wikit and what the Kenyan government, the position that the Kenyan government took, and the fact it annoyed many African countries, is that they have their own internal agreements, and we were seen like the position that we took then messed some of those agreements. And therefore, they feel that they're not able to get some positions that they have within the ITU and other processes. And therefore, we've been telling them if they'd made us understand, probably would have come up with a common understanding. When civil society participates, mostly it's to ensure that the problems that governments or businesses are not seeing are actually highlighted and dealt with. Businesses also are made aware of what happens and probably then comes up with an approach. So my final comment is that we just need to understand that different stakeholders have different interests.
Thank you. Bobby, please.
Sure. I think the only thing I would add is that we should all go back to our own particular colleagues, whether they be law enforcement, civil society, business interests, and let them know that this is important that they, participate, and also mentor them as well, so that they can, get a better grasp of the land and also be more productive while they're here as well.
Thank you. Norbert.
One main takeaway for me is that this point that was mentioned about trust, about the importance of trust, how easily it can be destroyed, is so much related to what I mentioned in the beginning about the need to have an acceptable level, because if in any of the many aspects that we have been discussing, like accountability, like having some kind of recourse if something goes wrong or maybe went wrong. If we don't have an acceptable level there, trust is going to be destroyed quite quickly. So going forward, I would say we need to work out for the different aspects what is the minimal amount of quality that we must have for an acceptable practice so that we don't go destroying trust, and then beyond that figure out how to get an even better practice, better than the minimal acceptable level, which will help building trust. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Guy next, please.
Thank you. What I enjoyed about this discussion, I think, is the recognition that this means different things in different contexts. And the multi-stakeholderism in the formulation of policy, such as in new domain names, is different. Formulation of policy is different to adoption of policy. And those are different implementation or oversight in implementation. So I think applying that more granulated understanding is important. But I'd also like to problematize a few things that we were celebrating here. One thing is consensus always the preferred goal of multi-stakeholderism? How important is it? Has multi-stakeholderism failed if you don't have consensus? Second, accountability. To what extent could accountability be a recipe for bureaucracy, inflexibility, as against creativity and flexibility? To what extent could bureaucracy mean instead of examining the merits of positions, you look at who the author is and you say, well, you don't represent anybody, so why should we listen to you? And my last problematizing point is, isn't it sometimes good to keep this term fuzzy rather than define it? We can kind of say what it's not to some extent. It's not unilateral. But the argument was made here, it's a marathon, not a sprint. But I don't know, maybe it could be relevant in certain sprinting situations. So let's keep it a bit fuzzy. Let's also remember this is a very contested term. Sometimes it's used as co-option coming from the top. Other times it's used for sort of grassroots pressure from below. And people are wrestling over this term and using it sometimes in ways which, precisely because it's vague, nobody quite can kind of change, to really get down to things. And we should think carefully about the metaphors in which we use to understand this, because if you frame it as a game, you get a very different concept of multi-stakeholderism. If you say it's a game as opposed to a power contest, as opposed to a business partnership, or opposed to a democratic process, these are all different metaphors. And so we've got to think each one means a different thing for multi-stakeholderism. But let's kind of keep it in play. Thank you.
What a marvelous set of provocations for the ongoing discussion on the list. I think that's great. Sebastian.
Thank you. Very happy with this panel and looking forward to continue to work. I think when we finish our work, we have produced two things. One is the output in itself, the best practices, and the other one to have shown how mature this multi-stakeholder process is, which is really, really good. So looking forward, I'm very happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know if Guilherme is online and wants to say anything.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm glad you're there. Please.
Yes, I'd just like to emphasize the relevance of transparency and accountability to decision-making processes related to multi-stakeholder initiatives. We have already achieved several advancements with respect to transparency in the procedures, but I think we should now emphasize transparency and accountability in the decision-making process, because this will really account for the legitimacy and the trust among all the all stakeholders.
Thank you. And I want to thank you all. We do have a list. I believe we'll keep working on that same list. I think, yes, John, would you like to say something? Sorry.
John Laprise for the record, for the IGF Secretariat. So I just want to thank all of you who've contributed to the list. Your work provides the foundation for the work I do in compiling and writing these best practices. And I'd like to invite everyone who is listening in, either here or distance, if you haven't already said something, come and join the list, come and contribute on the document. We want your comments. Your input is critical to the success of this process. So if you've been silent today, please come and contribute. Thank you.
Thank you. And last thing I'll say is that invitation even goes for people that weren't here today who listen to this thing in a week or a month or several months. So if anybody happens to listen to this later, we need your stuff. So anyhow, thank you all, and I'll see you online.